So we've talked a bit about how you can integrate grazers into your system and some of the different ways that might look and be managed within your system. How that can be used as a management technique, so it changes the composition or the structure of your food forest, and doing it with a chicken tractor and maintaining the complexity of your food forest, or bringing them in to kind of simplify and manage the support species and the diversification of that food forest. So the last two, the selection species and the commercial operation, they all kind of tie into these previous points too, but there's various ways you can kind of lay out your food forest system and think about the selection and placement of your species. So the first part really with the selection of species is that you want to do an analysis for your zone for what species will be most productive. So that will be dependent upon things like hours of frost. So if you're having more subtropical temperature sensitive species, so like kiwi fruit is quite sensitive to spring frosts, which will damage the flowers, or a lot of citrus is quite vulnerable to frosts, or avocado is too. So you want to pick species that are going to perform the best in the kind of conditions. So if you're getting big winter frosts and snows and things, you want to make sure that as a species it's deciduous, it will lose its leaves and not be badly affected by those winter conditions. Also, hours of sunshine is important, so that's degree days. So if you work out how many hours of sunshine and how many days there are with those hours of sunshine, it gives you the degree days, and that will every fruiting species will have a certain number of degree days that it will produce good fruit over. So some, like a stone fruit, want a good hot dry summer with lots of sunshine. Same with grapes, same with kiwi fruit, to produce a good crop. So if you're getting a more variable summer, so if there's a lot of cloud cover that doesn't create those kind of conditions, then alternative species like apples and pears are more resistant to that and will produce better in your particular conditions. So generally, hours of frost and degree days are your main considerations, but also things like the drainage of soil. So if it becomes waterlogged in winter, which will kill off a lot of the fruit trees which are sensitive to waterlogging of the soil, and also just the conditions of the soil. So certain trees like the Mediterranean ones like quite dry, free draining soils, while others like around Europe and England like quite denser, clayer soils. So they have different preferences for different types of soils. But once you've got an idea about what species will produce well in your particular area, wind's another one I should mention too. Some will withstand wind buffeting better than others, and particularly with damage to fruit and things. So you'll need to kind of consider that with wind screens and whether they are suitable to your site or the topography of your site. But anyway, once you've got an idea of the particular species that will suit your site, you've got to then think about the design and the layout of it. And I either go one of two ways. I go for a particular emphasis on a particular species. So if I'm interested in apples or figs or persimmons or whatever it may be, having your support species in support of that main production. So making sure that I can manage the growth of those support species with grazers or mowing, or if they're just low-lying and they're just not going to really interfere with my harvesting of this main fruit, and the training of them so that I can harvest this main crop effectively, so other plants in support. Or if you're getting more complexity in the system, so that can be fine on a smaller scale, I think, for food production for yourself or your family. having a smaller, great variety in your orchard on a smaller scale. You can kind of manage that, and you can go through your orchard and pick out what is productive at a particular point in time. But on a commercial scale, that gets quite messy and hard to manage. So complexity on a commercial scale, I like the system where you in your complexity, you are picking species that are commercially harvestable within a particular time of year. So, for example, all those species you can harvest in January, or all February, or all March, or all April. And then, if you're harvesting them yourself, you're limited by a particular area in which you're harvesting the fruit. Or you can even get people to come in for a U-pick system, and they can come through and pick the fruit within that particular range at that particular time of year. So it's a way of managing that complexity and concentrating that complexity on time of year, and still have quite good variation and different layers in your orchard crop. Or go the other way, as the trees become more mature, you can manage the support species more severely, bring in grazers to help manage their regrowth, and redirect more of the organic growth of that system into your main harvestable crops, simplifying the system a little bit as it gains maturity, and it has a bigger root network, and is able to beneficially change the soil conditions more on its own accord. But still having that complexity in the system with the grazers and the support species to support the health of that plant, making sure you're not getting too much towards a monoculture where you're going to get all those health problems back again. So these are the two ways I generally go. And then when I map out the species, just thinking about how I'm going to place that diversity. So where are my main productive species? Integrating maybe nitrogen fixating trees in between your productive species. You can use them to trellis vines over, or you can prune them back heavily to mulch these productive species. And then what other kind of support productive species you want? If you're going to locate berries in the little nooks and crannies around these main production trees, and have ground covers of herbs spread around these trees to help outcompete the weeds and provide an alternative harvest for you. So yeah, it's kind of thinking about how I'm going to manage it with grazers, what kind of way I'm going to go, whether it's a real focused system on a particular production, or whether it's more complex but organized around time of year, and then the design and the layout of those species. And then once you've got an image of that, so what species you're going to use, how you're going to manage it, looking at the layout of that design in your particular site. So looking at where your house zone is. This is a zone 2 permaculture orchard, so it's quite frequently used and frequently managed, so quite an intensive system. So you want to keep it quite close to the house. So you've got your zone 1, which is your home orchard, or kitchen garden, I often call it. And then your zone 2 orchard is generally located around that. And then you've got to kind of think about how are you going to pattern your rows of trees within this orchard, or if you are going to have rows of trees, or if you're going to have a scattering of trees around it. I quite like the rows of trees because you can organize the trees in compatible guilds, but you can integrate that quite well with grazing systems, and they can move in between these rows of trees. So these rows of trees help create structure to how these grazers are going to move through this system. But yeah, this kind of help organize the productive species in a close proximity, so that they can mutually benefit each other, and changing the soil conditions in a way that they're all going to benefit from. So you can start thinking about, where you're going to locate those different herbs and berries and nitrogen fixating trees and productive trees in that system, whether that's going to be focused on pears or whether it's focused on apples or maybe both, or figs or whatever it may be, or whether you're going to be, these are all your January ones, your February ones, your March or your April. So thinking about how you're going to structure the layout of that orchard, position it in relationship to the house for frequency of use, or the road. You might have some road access up here, so you can if it's a U-pick situation, for example, there may be parking here and a little way station maybe which you can man when it's open, and they can park in here, harvest whichever rows available that particular year, particular time of year. You can weigh it and you can charge them on the weight of the fruit, and they can leave. Or even just kind of accessing this orchard by road for harvest machinery. Just thinking about the placement in relationship to infrastructure, housing, access, topography of the land. There may be good wind protection. So in our area, for example, we've got northwesterly winds as our predominant wind. So there may be a good row of shelter trees here, or it might slope up to the west and south and give you good protection from the winds from those areas. So you want to nestle your orchard in to the zone which is best protected by those natural windbreaks and natural topography. So starting to kind of make all the connections. So between the gild complexity, the grazing management, the type of production, its placement in relationship to the house and access and natural topography. So it's fitting all the pieces together. So kind of looking at each of the factors that influence production, breaking it down, kind of analysing all the variables to it, and then once you've got all those variables mapped out, how can you place things and interconnect things most beneficially, which will require often a little bit of modification and placement, and just kind of getting a sense of what works. And often, and the benefit, I guess, of mapping it all out is you can come up with 3 or 5 different ideas of what could work. So you can go through all these different ideas mentally first before actually having to commit to doing it in real life and getting the financial cost of that. So you can kind of mentally go through this process, and you can pick out your best ideas. And there may be 3 ideas and you're not quite sure which one it is, and you can trial them on a smaller scale. So maybe before you go all out and plant it on a big scale, you can trial small areas of your orchard with what you think will work. So trying different guilds of plants and different arrangements. And once you find one that does work really well, replicating that on a bigger scale. And then, when you're replicating that guild of plants out on a bigger scale, again, the grazers, you might want to kind of think about different species and trialing them too. So, trialing some sheep and trialing some geese or chickens and seeing which one works best for you in your context, and which one has the best kind of interaction with your plants and doesn't damage your productive species or the ones you're most interested in, but at the same time kind of helps control the regrowth of the support species in a way that recycles their nutrients back into the soil. So just trialing a few things and getting the feedback from those trials before committing to a big scale production is a very good idea. It's often you kind of think of what would work well, and you think, great, let's go for it, and you can get unstuck later on down the road because you haven't really given it real life practice and trial.